Oh boy, Nintendo Prime is at it again. He is perfectly okay with Nintendo invading your privacy. Let's get into it.
This first story we have here, you see, Nintendo reserves the right to brick your console following unauthorized use in a bid to prevent piracy.
Oh, bullshit. They just want to sit there and invade your privacy with that new chat feature. So I would advise nobody to not pay for that overpriced chat feature.
What's very interesting about this update here, as you go in here, it talks about unauthorized use. It talks about the license key of digital products and Nintendo accounts and all of this stuff. It says any digital products registered to your Nintendo account.
They're only doing this because they don't want you to back up your games on your PC and end up using an emulator, which is all perfectly legal. If you sit there, have a legal copy of the game, you want to back it up to the computer to play on an emulator, that is all perfectly legal. This ain't piracy. They just want to stop you from doing that.
And any updates such as digital product are licensed for only personal and non-commercial use on a user device. Digital products must not be used for any other purpose, in particular without NOE's written consent. Yada 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 yada. Basically, they're saying they have the ability to delete, ban your account, or the system associated to it.
So pretty much, if you try to back up your files without written consent from Nintendo, they're going to sit there and break your console. It's one thing to delete your account. That's not that big of a deal. But to break your console to where it's completely useless? What happens if you want to sell? What happens if someone's borrowing it and someone does that crap? That's not right.
What's interesting about this story isn't so much that the headlines are incorrect. It's that, guys, this is literally nothing new. Nintendo's been doing this since the consoles first got internet access on the Wii and DS. This is not a new policy. People are acting like this is new and like, ooh, boo on you, big evil Nintendo. And hey, I'm not saying that this is good. What I am saying is that this isn't.
It doesn't matter if it's not nothing new. But there is something that's new. With the whole game chat feature thing, it allows them to record what you're saying. So essentially, you could say something they don't like and they could throw a temper tantrum over it, because we know how petty Nintendo can be.
Unusual. Nintendo's had this ability the whole time. They have many stories have broken over the years of Nintendo bricking systems because of it breaking the end user license agreement. This is literally like common. And by the way, this language they have also exists on PlayStation, Xbox.
Doesn't make it right just because it exists on there. We should be all fighting against this. If you buy your system, you should be able to use that system as you see fit. You own that actual system. Now, it's one thing if you're trying to sit there and put illegal stuff onto the system. That's one thing. That's different. But adding a software to it to allow you to turn the game you own into a ROM is not illegal. And you know that's what they're trying to do.
Even Steam. So it's common language. I think people are grabbing onto things that, yes, it sucks that this language exists, but it's also industry standard. So let's move on.
No, let's not move on. How are you okay with them recording your audio with that chat feature? So get this straight. You have to pay to use the chat feature, and on top of it, you're getting your privacy invaded. So you're paying to have them invade your privacy. Make that make sense.
Now, Nintendo seems to be offering these sorts of updates on their games practically for free, but obviously third parties are free to do what they want, call it what they want, charge what they want. So we just have to leave it at that.
No, we don't. What do you mean they're practically charging upgrades for free? Okay, both the Zelda games are like $20 upgrade editions or $10 upgrade editions or whatever the hell they are. That's ridiculous. They're doing the bare minimum for crying out loud and they want you to pay for it. No, that's not even right. And what do you mean that they can't control what third parties do? Of course they do. It's their platform. They could be like, no, you will not do this, or you will, if you do this, you will not release it on our platform. It is that simple. Hold Nintendo to the fire. Stop being a coward, Primey.
Another thing that we do need to talk about, though, and this is a really crappy thing from Nintendo and is not necessarily standard, although they aren't the first person to do this. They made another change to their end user license agreement, and this applies very broadly, not just to their consoles, but their theme parks and stuff. And it's important that I note that because Nintendo is pushing something that actually has been shot down in court and may not be legal.
This is shocking. Let's find out. Let's sit there and see if he actually does sit there and point this out. My guess is he's just going to gloss over it like he always does, make it not seem like it's that big of a deal and move on.
A new update to Nintendo's EULA prevents users from filing class action lawsuits against them. people will know that Disney had a very similar one here. It says, many pointed out Disney did a similar thing with a couple who attended a Disneyland park who couldn't sue the company for the wife's fatal allergic reaction because they had a Disney Plus subscription and they had agreed to the Disney Plus EULA. Thankfully, this didn't stand up in court. So the big thing about this isn't...
Yeah, thank God it didn't stand up in court. That's just ridiculous. But Nintendo wants to do the same thing. How does Nintendo think that that's even going to work out in the first place? But you never know. It only takes one judge to sit there and side with these damn horrible corporations.
that this isn't crappy, because this is very crappy. Nintendo trying to block class action lawsuits just for using any of their services for anything Nintendo related. But as we saw with Disney, who everyone was almost shocked that Disney lost, they weren't shocked because it wasn't the right thing to do. They were shocked because it showed big corporation that you can't just make up any policy you want and have it hold up in the court of law. And I'm guessing that Nintendo has this policy enacted more so for their theme parks, kind of like Disney. But
it doesn't matter where they sit there and have this enacted at. This is ridiculous. This should never even be okay. You should be sitting there being like, no, we're not going to support you if you're going to be doing this bullshit crap. But of course you are, Primey, because you don't stand up for anything but yourself.
Look, in the end, this is probably not legal, so I'm not like super worried about it. It is a shitty thing Nintendo put in their end user license agreement for all of their products. But again, it probably won't hold up in court. There's probably no way Nintendo can prevent class action lawsuits. Like if they're trying to prevent a class action over new Joy-Con drift or something, chances are it wouldn't legally stand up in court that they could actually enforce that part of their licensing agreement. So there you go. Still crappy Nintendo's doing it.
Of course it's still crappy that Nintendo's doing it. But I love how the only time he ever sits there and holds Nintendo to the fire about something is like, well, this is actually a pretty major thing, but we all know that's not going to go anywhere here in the United States. You can't contract outside the law in the first place, so it's not going to go nowhere. But it only takes that one judge to make it go through. But he'll sit there and go against Nintendo for these little things that don't really matter to us because it's not really going to affect us. But then when it comes to the big major things like the overpriced console compared to Japan, or the $80 Mario Kart World, or the overpriced upgrades for like Zelda and Tears of the Kingdom and all that, he is perfectly okay with those, perfectly okay with ripping us off. You want to know why? Because he gets a commission for that if you buy it through his link. You know, he don't get nothing out of it if you can't sue Nintendo or anything. So that's the only time he holds Nintendo to the fire, is when it doesn't affect his pocket.
Welcome. They're a business. And I wish they wouldn't attempt to do these things that have already been defeated in court, but it is what it is. Now, one thing we can get excited about is the level of third-party support coming to Switch 2, and we have some backing behind this.
Just like Nintendo Prime, he just sit there and go from something negative, which he very rarely ever says, to something positive about the whole third-party support. Well, of course, Nintendo finally made a console where it could have better hardware to handle most of these games. But just wait until next gen, when they can no longer handle these more impressive games. Just you wait. They're going to be stuck in the same part where it's not getting that much third-party support, and they're all going to be putting them on the bigger, better platforms anyways.
We head on over here to Go Nintendo, where we see an analyst says the level of Switch 2 third-party support is something we haven't seen on Nintendo hardware maybe ever. So it says when Nintendo pulled back the curtain on Switch 2, they did so showing a strong showing of third-party support from big and small devs alike. There's definitely proof of just how far Nintendo has come in terms of relationships with other devs and publishers. And one analyst thinks that Switch 2 could be a third-party haven unlike any other Nintendo platform in history. Speaking of games,
yes, for now, until the next gen. Because guess what? The Wii sat there and sold a lot. It didn't have that much third-party support. The reason why Nintendo doesn't get very many third-party supports is because their hardware is terrible. It's not strong enough. It can't handle the demanding games year after year that the newer systems sit there and innovate.
Radar industry analyst Matt Piscatella talked at length about third-party support lineup for Switch 2. So here's what he said. Historically, Nintendo products get purchased to play Nintendo games, and Nintendo platforms aren't the first place people look to play third-party content if they have other ways of accessing that content. Perhaps that changes here because of that support and because of the hybrid nature of the device. Maybe we see that start to change this time.
No, it's not going to change that. Just look at the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, like Harmon Smith loves to sit there and say, it sold like 5 million copies, which is a good thing to sell. But if that was the case and more people wanted to play a lot of those third-party games on the go, there would have been a lot more people buying a Steam Deck. But no, they didn't. You want to know where they played most of those? On the PC, on the PS5, on the Xbox. When it comes down to it, the third-party games are going to look way better on a PC, way better on the Xbox, and way better on a PS5 compared to the Switch 2. The Switch 2's hardware is just not strong enough to sit there and allow those games to look as good.
It's going to be super interesting to watch because we haven't seen this level of support maybe ever, but at least for a long time, maybe even since the GameCube. In terms of that third-party partnership approach, that's not something Nintendo had really pushed so much in prior launches.
Because Nintendo's hardware was terrible. Be honest there, Primey. You know that Nintendo's hardware could not handle it. What next? Are you going to be like Harmon Smith and sit there and say, oh, the Switch 1 can handle all those games?
And, you know, he has a point. Nintendo hasn't had full third-party support, especially from the AAA sphere, in a long time. And I think that Switch 2 is perfectly set up to get a ton of third-party support, at least over the next 5 years. Now,
the next 5 years, my ass. Maybe the next 2 years if you're lucky.
one of those games it's getting is a game that it did also get on Switch, but people are very curious about.
Yeah, let's just hope that it'll play a hell of a lot better than what you got on the Switch 1. The Switch 1 port was terrible. Now, I'm not going to go into it what he's about to read is sitting there explaining it, because they sat there and made it seem like the one on the Switch was going to run well, so we won't know until the game actually releases.
This is the one that people are clinging on to, and we already heard this from Doug Bowser. So if the tax assumptions change, we will consider that price adjustments would be appropriate, taking into account various factors, including market environment. And this is where people are running with the headlines that Nintendo is going to increase prices of Switch 2. This is literally exactly what Doug Bowser said, that we didn't consider tariffs when we initially priced the system. We're happy with where the price is at.
Oh, that's such bullshit. You know damn well they sat there. They knew about those tariffs coming. They may have not have known exactly how, but they knew that those tariffs were coming. And let's sit there and say that they did raise the prices of them, which eventually they're going to most likely. But let's say that they do. Do you think that the tariffs go away? Do you think they're going to lower those prices? Hell no. They're going to keep them up there because they want to make as much money as possible. They want to rip you off as much as possible. And coward people like you will sit there and accept those horrible price points. You already accept the horrible one of $450 when Japan gets theirs for $330.
If the situation changes, we might have to make adjustments. Literally, Doug Bowser said this like 3 weeks ago, and now we're running headlines yet again about Furukawa repeating what was already said. No, they're not planning to raise the price. They are assuming they don't even need to raise the price. That's why I read that prior sentence first. Furukawa is assuming they are not going to have to make any price adjustments. Their projections all include not making any price changes. However,
that was because they already included the tariffs to begin with. And then when they sat there and talked about, or when Trump sat there and talked about adding more money to the tariffs or adding more of a higher percentage of the tariffs, then they started freaking out because they weren't anticipating it being that much. And they were like, oh no, we're going to have to raise this even more because, of course, they don't want to take a loss for us, but they'll take a loss for Japan.
They have to note that unforeseen circumstances like tariffs massively rising on Vietnam could naturally lead to prices having to go up. So he's just noting that it could happen. They're not expecting it to happen, and they're not planning to raise prices. So a little bit of a misleading headline when you see Nintendo says it's going to go up. Like, no, that's not what they said. But,
Primey, you can believe that if you want to. If that was the case, they would have never rose that damn Mario Kart World to $80. They are planning behind the scenes to raise the prices even further. They are seething at the opportunity. They're hoping that Grand Theft Auto 6 releases at $100 so they can raise the prices even further.
People like to clickbait a little bit. Question 5. I would like to ask about the medium to long-term direction of Nintendo Switch Online.
You're sitting there saying that people like to clickbait. You clickbait all the time. You sit there and act like you're a Nintendo fan when you're not. You're nothing but a fanboy.
The number of things you can do throughout the Switch Online, such as Nintendo Music and Game Chat on Switch 2. I think Nintendo Switch Online will continue to grow as a stable source of revenue. I also like to know about the possibility of introducing new elements that make users want to continue subscribing. Achievements, perhaps?
Primey, you know damn well they're not going to do achievements. That'll be a great thing for them to do, but when have they ever done anything that was great for the consumer? Now, when it comes to their online thing, of course it's going to grow when they keep releasing games that are multiplayer type games and you want to play online. Just wait till they can finally get Marvel Rivals. If you want to play Marvel Rivals, you're going to have to sit there and pay for that horrible online subscription thing that they got. And then they're like, oh, well, you get the Super Nintendo stuff, and now you're going to get GameCube. Oh, yeah, thank you so much. You sit there and give us a bunch of games, but you won't give us the ones that we want. Where are all the Pokemon games at?
Game chat can be enjoyed not only with Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive titles, but also with titles for Nintendo Switch. We hope that the game chat will add new value to our software.
Well, of course, it adds value to them. They're saying, oh, we hope it adds value to our software. It adds value to Nintendo because then they can spy on you and sit there and invade your privacy. And when you say something that they don't agree with, they can sit there and act like a bunch of fascist dictators and brick your console.
Their developers wanted more power. They didn't want to change what the system was. They just wanted more power. So Nintendo gave them more power. And now we're getting games that they couldn't realize fully on Switch. That's what he's saying. You don't have to believe him if you don't want. But that's straight from the guy who runs Nintendo.
Well, of course they asked for more power. Everybody was screaming for more power a month into the Switch's life cycle. And 2 years into the Switch 2, they're going to be screaming for even more power.
All right. As we dive into this, regarding your question about the innovation of hardware, Nintendo Switch 2 may not look like much has changed.
I mean, it's not really an innovation, okay? All it is a bootleg version of the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck was innovation compared to the Switch 1. This is just the bootleg version.
In appearance. However, the hardware and peripherals have been completely redesigned. It has been completely remade and is packed with the ingenuity and attention to detail.
How can you say it was remade when the Steam Deck did what this couldn't? All they did was sit there and take the Steam Deck and add a few extra specs to it.
Of Nintendo's development team, who developed both the hardware and software together. I feel it has become a very Nintendo-like product. Going forward, we will continue to develop a variety of titles centered around the Switch 2 and provide new play experiences.
Well, they're going to have to sit there and create more titles. You want to know why? Because the third-party support is probably going to end in like 2 years.
By creating hardware that continues to surprise consumers with fresh content, we aim for the Nintendo Switch 2 to be the new standard for Nintendo Switch. What they're basically saying is, if we continue the Switch brand, yeah, we're going to keep doing like a Switch 3, a Switch 4, a Switch 5.
Yeah, and all they're going to be doing is just keep copying the Steam Deck 2, 3, and 4, because the Steam Deck 2 is probably going to be coming out soon.
If we decide to continue it, and we believe the innovation comes in the games themselves, not via the hardware. There's something I've talked about before.
Well, of course they would sit there and say like, oh, well, the innovation is going to come in the games, which when was the last game that they made that was innovative except for Breath of the Wild? After that, they have literally just remade most of their games anyways. There's nothing new to them. And of course they can't compete in the hardware space.
Before that, like, you can make all the wonky controller schemes and all this that you want, but ultimately the games are what create the innovation, not the hardware.
Kind of true. But you do need better hardware to play the better games, because you can only innovate the game so much before it's outdated. Okay, eventually they're going to be able to innovate their certain titles. They're going to have better hardware. That's why we're stuck in the situation that the Switch has been in.
So they're basically saying, yeah, we're not really planning to go away from this strategy unless something drastically changes in the Switch family. Like if Switch 2 bombs, yeah, we'll probably decide a new direction. If it goes really, really well, yeah, we're probably going to do a Switch 3.
I don't think that the Switch 2 is going to bomb. What I think we're going to have is between like the 3DS and the DS situation, or DS and 3DS, where the DS sold so well and then the 3DS sold about half. That's what I think we're going to have. Well, that's it for my reaction. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with me or not. Please like, share, and subscribe, and remember to always wrap it up so you don't produce a cowardly son like Nintendo Prime. And until next time, stay vigilant.